I'm 40 years old and currently living in Greenville, South Carolina. Jason, my husband, and I have been together for 9 years. No children, no chaos, just one constant shadow, Lena, his biological sister. Lena has always lived with the belief that everyone should cater to her. She borrows things, breaks them, never apologizes, and certainly never says thank you. One day, she texted me asking to borrow my SUV for a weekend trip. I refused. I needed the car for work, and frankly, I didn't trust her to respect anything that didn't belong to her. I thought that was the end of it, but I was far too naive. Everything started on a peaceful Saturday evening. I had just returned home after a long day at work, carrying bags full of groceries, thinking only of preparing a warm family dinner. But the moment I stepped into the house, my phone started blowing up, message after message, call after call, all about something I never could have imagined. Did you assault Lena's child? That question kept popping up from friends, neighbors, even acquaintances. It felt like a wave crashing into me, leaving me frozen in place at the doorway, unable to believe what I was reading. The first feeling was confusion, quickly followed by a surge of anger. I couldn't understand how things had come to this, how someone could lie about me so blatantly. It felt as if the entire community was looking at me through shattered glass, all believing in baseless lies. When I called Lena, she answered immediately, her tone light and casual as if nothing had happened. "Oh, I just mentioned it in passing. The boy just got a small bruise. Nothing serious, don't worry." I couldn't believe my ears. What was she saying? I hadn't even seen the child all week, and there hadn't been any incident involving him. Yet she had gone and spread this harmful rumor. I started to feel like I couldn't breathe, as if a boulder was pressing down on my chest. "Unacceptable," I told Lena straight out. "You need to clarify this immediately. Don't let people misunderstand." But instead of apologizing or explaining, Lena calmly told me not to blow things out of proportion. "Don't make a big deal out of it. It's just a misunderstanding. I didn't mean anything by it." She was disturbingly indifferent. After that call, I couldn't think clearly anymore. Everything had turned into a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. A wave of helplessness and disappointment washed over me, making me feel as though I'd been brutally betrayed right within my own family. I told Jason everything, the husband I trusted, the man who once promised to protect me from anything. But his response wasn't what I expected. He didn't defend me, didn't show any frustration toward Lena. Instead, he looked at me wearily and quietly said, "Just apologize and get it over with. You know how Lena is." Every word from Jason felt like a stab to the heart. He wasn't just siding with his sister. He was asking me to do something I simply couldn't. Apologize for something I didn't do. Jason wasn't just bowing to Lena. He was leaving me alone to take the fall. I felt like an invisible object in the very relationship I had spent my life building, a relationship I once thought was the safest place for me. I couldn't take it anymore. If things kept going this way, I would lose myself completely. I couldn't let this lie continue to control my life. Everything suddenly became clear. I had to act, not just for myself, but for the sake of my own dignity. When everything became uncertain and no one stood by me, I knew that if I didn't handle this myself, this injustice would consume me. I needed to act. I couldn't continue living in the shadows of endurance and resignation. I had stayed silent for far too long, suffering wounds without anyone to protect me. Especially from Jason, the person I had always considered my refuge, who now merely bowed his head in the face of our family's collapse. I decided to call Maya, my best friend since college, who now works at the Department of Human Services. Maya is the person I trust most, not just because of our long-standing friendship, but also because of her deep understanding of serious child-related issues. The moment I told her about Lena's accusations, Maya didn't hesitate. "Morgan, this is a serious violation. If someone spreads false information about a child-related incident without evidence or medical reports, it's dangerous and absolutely subject to investigation." That sentence was like a splash of cold water to my face, snapping me completely awake. I couldn't allow Lena to fabricate an entire false story without consequences. She hadn't just hurt me, she had ruthlessly smeared my reputation. "I'll help you," Maya continued. The agency will get involved. If she doesn't have any credible evidence, she will be held accountable. The very next morning, just as I was waking up, I heard the doorbell ring. A wave of anxiety rose in me, but I knew this was the moment I had to face everything. I looked out the window and saw a police car and a DHS vehicle parked in Lena's driveway. It was a feeling I couldn't quite describe, as if my entire house trembled in the cold wind, as if the truth was finally about to come to light. I didn't know what they were going to do, but I knew that without the intervention of the authorities, Lena would continue to hurt me without ever facing any consequences. Lena opened the door in her pajamas, her face groggy, hair a mess. The officers and DHS agents entered with a serious demeanor, and I could hear them questioning Lena about the child she had accused me of bumping into. Their questions were cold and direct. Why didn't you take the child to a doctor after the incident? Why didn't you report it immediately to the authorities if your child was truly hurt? Is there anything else you haven't told us? Lena stammered, trying to explain, but her story became increasingly inconsistent. She couldn't provide any specific evidence, nor could she explain why the child had no visible injuries whatsoever. From her tone and her words, I could sense panic beginning to take over. She could no longer keep up the charade. As a result, after a series of questions and an investigation, Lena was penalized for providing false information. The police documented everything, and I knew that her lies were finally starting to crumble. But what gave me the deepest sense of satisfaction was Jason's silence. He had nothing to say. He didn't defend his sister, and he had no way to justify her actions anymore. When I heard the news that Lena was being penalized, a strange feeling of relief washed over me. However, I knew this was only part of the battle. Lena wasn't the only one who had to face the truth. Jason did too. His entire family had watched me endure in silence for far too long. Now, the truth had begun to surface, and no one could keep it hidden forever. The rumors about me spread quickly, like a storm dragging along baseless accusations and harsh judgments. In just a short time, the whole neighborhood was in an uproar. The stories Lena spun about me weren't just ordinary gossip. They had turned into serious accusations that could damage my reputation and everything I had built over the years. Neighbors began whispering, passing around things they'd heard from Lena, making me feel like I couldn't find refuge anywhere, not even a moment of peace. Lena didn't stop. She kept inventing lies about me, claiming I had stolen things from neighbors, even accusing me of poisoning her cat, and spreading tales that I had trespassed into someone's backyard without permission. Every rumor that surfaced felt like a fresh cut to my heart, leaving me in pain and frustration. I tried to keep my emotions in check, but it all felt like it was spiraling out of control. One afternoon, while walking through the neighborhood, I overheard a few neighbors chatting. They were discussing the things Lena had said about me, stories I hadn't even known had reached their ears. She said she saw Morgan in their backyard. She might have stolen something from Mr. Miller's place. And she doesn't even hesitate. She just takes what she wants. Another voice chimed in. What about Lena's cat being poisoned? Did anyone see that happen? They've got security cameras, you know. Nobody saw Morgan there that whole afternoon. These words hit me like stones, making me choke up. So people were finally beginning to realize that Lena's stories didn't add up. As soon as I got home, I did what I needed to do. I visited a few neighbors whom I knew and trusted. Several of them confirmed that their security cameras had recorded all activities in the area and showed no evidence of me being there at the time Lena claimed I had trespassed. In fact, I learned that when Lena told them I had stolen or poisoned her pet, people began to doubt the truthfulness of her stories. The truth had begun to unravel. Everything was gradually becoming clearer, not only to the neighbors, but also within my own mind. However, what upset me the most wasn't the rumors. It was Jason's silence. He didn't show a single strong reaction, made no effort to protect me. The image of the husband I once trusted now seemed to completely fade. Jason didn't just remain silent when his family crossed the line. He quietly sided with Lena. I found out he had been secretly texting her, asking her to smooth things over. Don't let this go too far. Those messages felt like a slap to my face, hurting more than anything else. How could he so easily ignore the pain Lena had caused me? I couldn't stop asking myself, He knows exactly what his sister is like, manipulative and deceitful, and he still left me to suffer all of this alone? That question kept echoing in my mind, haunting me endlessly. I wanted an explanation from Jason, but he avoided and dodged me. The feelings of disappointment, hurt, and anger kept piling up like endless waves crashing over me. Honestly, I didn't know how to keep living in this silence. When the entire family had turned their backs on me, when Jason couldn't stand by me, his wife, who had always sacrificed for the family, I realized I had to stand up for myself. I couldn't let the silence continue to suffocate me. I needed to act. Lena never accepts defeat. After being exposed for her lies, she didn't retreat. On the contrary, she became more aggressive, launching a public smear campaign to turn me into the villain she wanted the entire neighborhood and beyond to despise. She posted a lengthy accusation on the Brookview Circle Residents Facebook group where we live. The claims in that post were brutal. I was accused of stalking, threatening, and even vandalizing her family's property. Lena wasn't just telling a false story. She was erasing my dignity, turning me into someone anyone could view with suspicion. These were outright slanders, and what hurt even more was that she felt no remorse. She treated it like a game she was winning. Soon after, I received a printed copy of that post left right at my front door. Along with it was a small slip of paper with bold black letters. "Someone like you doesn't belong here." Those words cut straight to my heart, making me feel like I no longer had a place in the community I had called home for so many years. I felt like I was being exiled, pushed out of the world I had once been proud to be part of. Everything I had built and tried to protect was now being destroyed by a single lie. But it didn't stop there. The storm Lena created was bigger than I imagined. Right after receiving that notice from the residents group, I was hit again, this time from a place I never expected. The company where I had worked for many years. An email from Human Resources arrived, informing me that the company had received several allegations involving me and children. People at work and my colleagues had all heard the rumors. They requested that I clarify and provide evidence regarding the matter, or I could face disruption in my employment. As I read the email line by line, I felt like I was being suffocated. It felt as though the air had been sucked out of the room, leaving behind a dead silence. How could one of Lena's lies have pushed me to this point? How could I be treated like a criminal, all because I refused to lend her my car? All the effort I had put in over the years, all my dedication and patience, suddenly felt like a joke. Standing there, staring at the message on my phone from work, I felt like all my hard years of labor no longer meant anything. Everything was collapsing before my eyes. The career I had worked so hard to build, the professional life I had devoted myself to, now at risk of ruin, all because of a baseless accusation. I felt hollow, powerless. For the first time, I truly felt like I was up against the entire world, and the world was turning its back on me. All because of a lie from Lena. But it was in that very moment that I realized something. If I kept staying silent, if I didn't stand up to this injustice, not just my job, but everything I had ever built would be destroyed. No, I couldn't let that happen. I could not allow myself to be cast into darkness because of an unfounded lie. I couldn't let silence suffocate my dignity anymore. I decided I had to act. For far too long, I had buried the pain and avoided the truth, but now I knew I couldn't keep going like that. I wouldn't let Lena or anyone else continue trampling over me. I began collecting every piece of evidence I could, from Lena's text messages to reports from DHS and confirmations from neighbors I once thought were just acquaintances. Each piece I uncovered only fueled my determination. When I made the decision to reclaim justice for myself, I didn't stop at mere accusations. I needed proof, and I wouldn't rest until every one of Lena's lies was exposed. The messages from Lena increasingly became undeniable testimonies. They were like sharp blades slicing through the many masks she had worn for so long. The texts I had saved, every word she said, showed her deceit and manipulative nature. One of the strongest pieces of evidence I collected came from the neighbors. Not only had they witnessed what I'd been through, but they were living proof of Lena's behavior. One by one, they came forward, sharing things I hadn't known. Some said they had been taken advantage of by her before. Others recalled the lies Lena had spun to cover up her own mistakes. It was a comprehensive view of her behavior over time. Things she thought she could keep hidden were now out in the open. Everything she had done was now recorded, now brought to light. The things Lena had said about me, the slander I had endured, were no longer just my burden. The whole neighborhood had started talking about her, and I no longer faced those lies alone. People who had once been silent or unaware began to speak up. That feeling of not having to endure the defamation alone was truly liberating. But it didn't stop there. I discovered something even more horrifying. While I was fighting Lena and her lies, I began to realize something worse. Lena wasn't just deceiving me, she had been manipulating everyone around her. She had lied not only to me, but also to her own family, friends, and neighbors. The entire neighborhood had now become a boiling pot, where people began to expose Lena's web of lies. I no longer felt alone in this battle. One discovery, in particular, haunted me. Lena had been lying about her rent. She hadn't paid rent for 3 months. When I found this out, I couldn't contain my anger. She had humiliated me, but now I knew what I needed to do to prevent her from continuing to hurt me and others. Her lies weren't just harming me, they were hurting the whole community. As I kept digging for more evidence, I couldn't help but notice Jason's silence. The man who once vowed to protect me now stood still as his sister carried out her deceit. I began to feel a deep pain inside. How could I trust a man I had been with for so many years, if he couldn't even stand up for me against the slander and cruelty of his own sister? Then, one day, I received a critical piece of information from a neighbor. He told me Lena was behind on her rent and had already come under the radar of local authorities. That news hit like a final blow. There was no room for silence anymore. Lena couldn't keep running from the truth, and I wouldn't let her keep living in lies. The same neighbors who once stayed quiet were now speaking out, sharing their own experiences with Lena and her dishonesty. The people I had once thought were just onlookers now saw clearly that Lena hadn't only deceived me, she had deceived everyone. The entire neighborhood had changed. What Lena had done could no longer be hidden, and the truth had finally come to light. Now I could stand tall and be proud of my decision. She could no longer shove me into the shadows she had created. Those around me had started to see the truth, and I knew I no longer had to face her alone. Everything had changed now, and Lena could no longer survive in the shell of lies she had built. That day, the neighborhood community meeting was more crowded than I had ever seen. I had never witnessed the room so packed. Eyes turned toward me. Each gaze felt like it could pierce right through me. But I couldn't avoid it anymore. Couldn't turn my back on everything. My heart pounded, anxious and nervous, but also filled with determination. I sat in the front row, my hands tightly gripping the edge of the chair, as if holding on could help me hold myself together. Inside, all the emotions, confusion, tension, and anger settled into a deep undercurrent, one I knew I could no longer keep buried. When the meeting room door opened, Lena walked in. She wore sunglasses, her face trying to mask anxiety, but no one missed the fact that she was seeking attention. She pulled along the child she always used as a tool to elicit sympathy. The way she entered, as though she were the main character in a grand drama, drawing everyone's eyes, shifted the entire atmosphere in the room. It tightened like a stretched string, ready to snap at any moment. It was a calculated, manipulative entrance, an attempt to assert power. Susan, the meeting's moderator, was the first to speak. She tried to keep the tone neutral, but the tension seeped into every word. "We're here to address the recent harmful rumors." The room fell silent, but the weight in the air only grew heavier. The rumors Lena had been spreading for so long had finally reached the moment they could no longer be ignored or hidden. Then I stood up, slowly but resolutely. Though part of me hesitated, part of me wanted to retreat, I knew I couldn't. Each step I took was an act of courage, a release from the burden I had carried for too long. I took a deep breath to steady myself, then said, "If you have anything to accuse me of, please say it in front of everyone." The room became unbearably silent. I wasn't fully aware of my own actions, but I felt deeply that with every word I spoke, I wasn't just standing up for myself. I was standing up for everyone who had been hurt by Lena's cruelty. These weren't just words of resistance. They were a declaration that I was no longer the woman who silently endured slander. And I said it all. No one responded immediately, but I could feel the skeptical eyes shifting toward Lena. Then, unexpectedly, people I never thought would speak began to rise. Brent was the first. He stood with a serious face, eyes filled with contempt as he looked at Lena. "Lena, you lied to me about my breaking your window," he began. "You accused me and my wife. I believed you. I worried about it. But now I know I was deceived." Then came Melissa, my neighbor across the street. She stood up, her face flushed with anger. "I had to hear false stories from Lena saying I stole from her. But I am not a thief, and I can't tolerate her targeting me just to protect her own lies." The room fell quiet for a moment. Then another voice, Kathy, who lived near Lena, spoke up. "She said I trespassed in her garden, but that's a lie." No one entered. Nothing happened. "She's just trying to smear other people's names." Each of these statements struck at the truth, stripping away Lena's fake persona. She stood there, her face reddening, her eyes showing fear. How much longer could she hide? The truth was beginning to break apart her carefully constructed act, and she couldn't stop the flood of accusations. Soon after, Lena couldn't take it anymore. She abruptly stood up, her face flushed with anger and humiliation. She grabbed her son and stormed out, leaving behind suspicious glances and the light of truth exposing everything. Suddenly, the meeting room door slammed shut, startling everyone. It echoed like a reflection of her desperate escape, an unwillingness to face what had been laid bare. Silence blanketed the room after she left. People began exchanging glances, a silent agreement passing between them. Everything had come to light. A chain of truths had been exposed, and Lena could no longer run. Truth, like a weapon, was powerful and impossible to hide. The whole neighborhood now understood, and there was no one left innocent in this story except me. That day, the truth finally laid everything bare. Lena, the person who had made me suffer in silence for so many years, now had no place left in this community. After the meeting, it wasn't just me. Everyone in the neighborhood began to see her differently. Not long after, Lena was asked to leave the neighborhood. She could no longer remain in the place where she had pretended to be a victim for so long. She had to move out, to live with Jason's mother, the very place I never expected her to turn to once she had been exposed. Although DHS had officially closed the investigation, her record remained, a reminder that she couldn't so easily run away from the damage she had caused. But what I didn't expect was Jason, the husband I had once placed all my trust in, mumbling quietly after everything had ended. "Maybe we should think about helping Lena see a doctor," a sentence I never wanted to hear from him. Everything I had sacrificed, all the effort I had poured into our life together, seemed to be repaid with that vague, meaningless statement. I looked at him, and it felt like my heart was being crushed. Jason, the man who had once stood by me in my darkest hours, the man who once held my hand and vowed to protect me through all storms, now could only sigh, powerless. He couldn't meet my gaze, couldn't face the hope in my eyes. He just stood there, a faded shadow with no strength, no conviction. I no longer saw the man I once loved, only someone weak, resigned, and willing to compromise with what was wrong. For the first time in our marriage, I couldn't help but ask myself, should I keep living this life? I had given so many years to this family, sacrificed for my husband and our children, and in the end, it all felt like a game played by the weak, a play I was never allowed to participate in fairly. When I needed him most, when I was facing humiliation and pain, he didn't stand by me. He only wanted to keep the peace, to compromise with lies and injustice. In that moment, I was overwhelmed with disappointment and despair. Our marriage was no longer a safe haven. It had become a cage that imprisoned my dreams and hopes. Everything I had done, everything I had given, seemed to mean nothing to him. What he cared about, what he protected, was a false sense of peace, and the relationships he placed above all else. He defended his sister, the one I knew was full of lies and schemes, while I, his wife, the one who had stood by his side, was left alone in terrifying silence. For the first time in all the years we had been together, I no longer felt safe next to him. I began to realize that if I stayed in this relationship, I would have to live forever in the shadows of betrayal and emotional starvation. Could I continue being the wife of a man who no longer believed in me? Could I go on living a life where I was just his shadow, when he would never be willing to stand up for me when I needed him most? That question kept echoing in my mind, relentless and painful. I couldn't shake the growing weight in my chest, and I knew that change was near. Lena no longer appeared in my life. The house she once rented now stood silent, cold, like a warning to anyone who ever thought they could spin lies without consequence. Sometimes I drive by that street, my eyes drifting toward her old home, and I wonder, did she really think she could lie forever and never be found out? I smile gently, not with hatred, but with peace. I know one thing for sure. Truth doesn't need to shout. It doesn't need to be loud or argumentative. Truth only needs to be spoken clearly, calmly, and without fear. And when it is, all falsehoods, all justifications, will eventually shatter and vanish. Now, I live in true peace, a freedom no longer bound by lies or toxic relationships. I no longer have to hide my feelings, no longer have to endure the oppression of people who never appreciated me. And most importantly, I have found myself again.